Welcome to the Shamrock. I'm Pete Sampson, joined as always by my co-host Matt Fortuna. And Matt, today we have a guest that, as I said and as I introduced him, doesn't really need an introduction. Frankly, a bit of a soundtrack for how I grew up loving football. I'm guessing it's probably a similar story for you and Brent Musburger. I think that not only is he a great guy to go down memory lane with, but he was at the game last weekend, which was a pretty cool thing to talk about as well.
Yeah, would have been a fun guy to hang with, especially in the desert. Just knowing what he's got going on there with Beeson, and I used to be the Raiders radio play-by-play voice. But yeah, just that voice. He's one of those few remaining iconic voices who, to your point, doesn't need introduction. Like you hear him and you immediately know it's a big gamer. In this case, a big podcast. I think I didn't get a chance to ask him about the last Notre Dame game he called, which I believe featured Eminem in the booth with him, saying that exact same thing. But we got to plenty of good stuff, and I think our listeners will enjoy it.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's get to Brent Musburger joining the Shamrock. Joined by a special guest today on the Shamrock, somebody who needs no introduction, but I will give him one anyway. He's kind of the voice of college football for a generation of Notre Dame fans, and for somebody like me who grew up in Michigan in the 80s. NFL Today was where I was introduced to Brent Musburger and sort of drew me into the idea of sports media as a profession. So very pleased to be joined by Brent Musburger from VSiN in Las Vegas today on the Shamrock. Brent, first, thanks for making some time. And I was curious what you thought of the game on Saturday night when Notre Dame came out your way.
Well, first of all, it was an incredible crowd. We had over 64,000 in Allegiant Stadium. And I obviously have seen all the Raider games, called them on radio and everything here at Allegiant. And this crowd was noisier than Raider crowds. Now, the BYU people occupied one end zone, of course, the student body, an easy trip down from Provo. But Notre Dame fans came from all around the country. And the green scattered about. And it was such a great evening. I took a Notre Dame alum, Mike Palm, who also works at VSiN with me, never been to Allegiant. And it was a special night. It was a good game. Notre Dame was clearly the better team. And I saw a tight end that I'm going to recommend that any NFL team, Michael Mayer, he was a force all night long. And watching Travis Kelce last night on television against the Raiders for the Chiefs with those 4 touchdowns, I'm thinking to myself, NFL teams do not pass up Mayer if you don't have a tight end.
Brent, how much of the Irish have you gotten to watch from a distance this season? What's just kind of your overall take on the program, especially as they transition to the Marcus Freeman era?
Well, this was the first game that I've really watched every play carefully. I was aware of the struggles early in this season. I caught part of the Ohio State game. Obviously, the new coach breaking in his system and some new assistants, and you have to give him time to go out and recruit. Irish were probably overrated when the season began. I noticed that they were number 5 in the polls, and now they're underrated. They belong in the top 25. They demonstrated that to me on Saturday night. It was a good-looking football team. Quarterback threw the ball well. They had some speed. They could get to the edges with their running backs. And, of course, Mayer is a force as a tight end. And this week I just noticed, I just checked the VSiN odds board, and the Irish are a 17-point favorite at home against Stanford. Now, Stanford's not very good this year, and the Irish should be able to take care of business. The over-under in that game, I think, is up into the low 50s. I think it was 53 the last time I checked. So we shall see. It's always that way with Notre Dame. Going to school at Northwestern, of course, when Ara Parsegan was the Wildcat coach, and he beat Notre Dame every year that I was up at Northwestern. And so the Irish came and wisely scooped him away, and he became the legend at South Bend. So I love the Notre Dame program. I was probably the only journalist at the time. I was writing for the Chicago's American. I'm probably the only journalist in the country who defended Ara in the 10-10 tie against Michigan State. And if you go back and look at that game on the last series, Ara had a backup quarterback, backup center, And Duffy Doherty, the Michigan State coach, took Bubba Smith, who became a legend in the NFL. He moved Bubba over to the nose. Era threw the ball long on the first couple of downs, but he realized he was going to get his quarterback killed if he didn't run the ball at the end of the game. And, of course, the Irish wound up number one. And it was Dan Jenkins who actually turned the fire on Era in front of the elevator when we were headed down for the interviews. But I thought Era did exactly what he should do in that situation. So I go way back with the Irish.
Yeah. I think there's probably the bulk of our listeners who sort of grew up on Notre Dame football listening to you call it, whether that be the 88 game against Miami or the 2012 season with Oklahoma and the Alabama games. Like, I hesitate to ask, like, if you have a most memorable game you would call, because I think 88 would be pretty obvious. But like, what games have stood out most to you in terms of your experiences being around Notre Dame and calling Notre Dame games?
No, obviously it was the 88 Miami game. It still brings back memories when I was walking into the stadium early. A young student came up and he had a T-shirt in his hand. And he handed it to me. He said, "We'd like you to have this." And so I looked at the front of it and it said, "Catholics versus convicts." And I just started laughing as I took it up in the elevator. And I've still got it in one of my storage boxes up in Montana. But then that became a great, great football game. And Jimmy Johnson still hasn't forgiven us up in the booth. He thought that we were very pro Notre Dame. He thought he had the first down. Going in down the end zone against Lou Holtz's Irish. It was a great, great football team, and a lot of guys in that game went on to the National Football League. But I'll never forget it. The crowd and the setting and the beauty, and we had to redo the opening. We had taped an opening, and I got a call from the truck before the game. And they said, "Brent, you got to do it live." I said, "Why? What are you talking about?" He said, "They had a fist fight in the tunnel. They had a fist fight, the two teams, and they changed the protocol for coming out of the tunnel in South Bend after that game. So there were many, many memories from that 88 showdown."
How different is it for you right now, Brent, just viewing and consuming college football? I'm sure there's a part of you that misses, obviously, calling the big game every Saturday, but it sounds like a pretty sweet gig you've got going for yourself right now. Can you just kind of compare and contrast the two?
Yeah, obviously I miss the enthusiasm of the crowds. People ask me what's the difference between college and the NFL. And I said, well, the crowds are the biggest difference. I said, and the bands. I said, it's a happening. You go around the country. People ask me, what's your favorite stadium? I said, I don't have one. There's so many good ones around the country. Obviously, South Bend would be on the list. But I said there's sleepers like Clemson, or you go down to the Grove at Ole Miss. So I miss that kind of energy. But when it comes to performance of the athletes on the field, it's a different time zone between the NFL and college. I mean, the college kids who are touted, talking about Mayer, the tight end, they have no idea how much higher the skill level is, especially the speed in the secondary. I once asked John Elway, I said, "John, what's the biggest difference?" He had gone to the Broncos and was playing very well. He said, "Flint, the field in the NFL is so much smaller. Obviously, that's the speed of the athletes who are out there and the performance." So they both, the 4-team playoff kind of turns me off in college football simply because it's the same old, same old. I love the fact that Cincinnati got in. I've always loved the college basketball tournament because the little guys have a chance. Now, I don't think the little guys are going to be beating the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Ohio States anytime soon, but it's nice to see them have a chance. And so I look forward to the expanded playoff.
I was interested, as somebody who's seen different iterations of college football and how it figures out its national champion, which has been it was fairly convoluted early on. And, now, like you said, it's a little bit samey, with the same guys every now and what's sort of your feeling on sort of the state of the sport? Because I think a lot of people have expressed concerns, whether it be the portal or the postseason or NIL. And yet you go to the game on Saturday night, it's sold out, it's loud, it's raucous, the environment is amazing. So how do you sort of view where college football is as a sport right now?
I honestly like the portal. If if youngsters don't think they're getting a chance or there's too much depth. I mean, every place I look, there's some Alabama players who have transferred elsewhere because they want more playing time. And all you have to look at is Jalen Hurts with the Philadelphia Eagles, who was once the Alabama starting quarterback and then went to Oklahoma. However, what I am uneasy about is the payments to the players by the merchants in these various. I'm very, very uneasy about that. I don't know that any good is going to come out of that because I think the rich are going to get richer. But we will see. And maybe I will be proven completely wrong. But the portal, I always, I check the list and see which kids are going elsewhere. Maybe they're not getting along with the coaching staff or whatever. So I've never been against that, to tell you the truth, because sometimes those schools, when you go back to the era of Bear Bryant down in Alabama, he stockpiled guys down there. I mean, there were 3 or 4 deep of guys that could play elsewhere. But the local car dealer contributing millions and things like that. I mean, I saw Bryce Young, the Alabama quarterback, show up on a Dr. Pepper commercial, and it was jarring for me to see him sitting on that couch in the middle of that commercial. But we'll see. We'll see how it works out.
Brent, Notre Dame has a big game in a couple weeks against Clemson. I think Clemson fans still refer to you calling their intro the 25 most exciting seconds in college football. I'm curious, what are some of the more memorable calls and some of the ones you personally truly identify with certain schools? Well,
with Clemson, obviously, it's the start of the game. They load the players in the buses from the locker room, and they drive around the stadium, and then they pour down the hill and they touch the rock as they come onto the field. That's as exciting as it gets. And, to tell you the truth, here on Saturday night, the Notre Dame marching band coming out and playing the fight song and seeing the thousands of Irish fans on their feet, singing to the sound of that marching band down there. It brought back a lot of great memories. There's so many things that go on in the stadiums, Ohio State, Michigan games through the years, even as a writer. Cover, Woody and Bo going at it back in the day. Texas, Oklahoma, when they get together at the fair there in Dallas, that's always a great showdown at the old Cotton Bowl. Although I'll tell you what, Texas put a hurting on them here this last weekend. I think for my buddy Brent Venables, I think he's probably under a little heat there in Norman after that performance. So we shall see. But you go on and on about the great moments and the great things that you've seen around college football. Coach Kelly, who I know very well now down at LSU, having left Notre Dame, I still tease him that when he got blown out by Alabama in that national championship game, I took all the heat off him because I called a beauty queen beautiful, and that I was the villain that night in the eyes of many, especially the woke journalists with some of the papers around the country. And I say, Coach, you'd have been under the gun if it wasn't for me. And he laughs. I mean, he's a good old politician, and we'll see what he does. He would like to come to the Vegas Bowl, interestingly enough, because he knows the Bishop Gorman coaching staff. Bishop Gorman, of course, is one of the great high school programs in the country, and there's always upwards of a dozen prospects that colleges are looking to sign to go forward. So we shall see.
Yeah, it's good to be associated with the Fertittas, I think, in any way possible around Bishop Gorman. I know Notre Dame was, and I think Brian Kelly still is at LSU.
As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/shamrock. That's linkedin.com/Shamrock to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. SLING TV is something for everyone. All your favorite shows on your favorite channels, all right at your fingertips. What you watch is up to you. It really just depends on what kind of mood you're in. So if you're looking for sports, Sling's got you covered with pro and college football and basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, golf, racing, and so much more. Sling also has reality TV, so you can keep up with the latest gossip with today's hottest shows on channels like TLC, Bravo, MTV, and more. And don't forget about news. Get up to date with today's most trusted sources like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Feeling adventurous? Explore thousands of movies and shows on demand. So what kind of mood are you in? No matter what your answer, Sling has what you need. Getting Sling is easy. Sign up and start watching in just 5 minutes. You can stream on any device and record up to 50 hours with included DVR space. And the best part is, you can pause or customize your subscription at any time. Check out sling.com for special offers. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try us today.
You mentioned the 2012 season, and I remember the Oklahoma game and you calling it, and distinctly as Theo Riddick scored maybe the clinching touchdown, you said very emphatically that Notre Dame is relevant again, or something to the effect of, it's time to stop asking the question, is Notre Dame relevant? Which, as somebody who covers Notre Dame every day, I just want to say I appreciate that, because that I can't think of a more tedious discussion than Notre Dame and relevance. But what do you remember about that game? Because that really was, I think, one of the peak moments of Brian Kelly's 12 years here, and something that I think a lot of Notre Dame fans really remember fondly to this day.
Yeah, I had been around. I actually knew Coach Kelly from his days at Cincinnati before he went to South Bend. Okay. And when Lou Holtz was there, I mean, Notre Dame was dominant, and he had convinced the good fathers that we're going to take some chances on some kids. And the one thing that I always admired about Notre Dame, I've learned as a writer, is when you're a freshman there, you don't have to be a football player, but one of the good fathers is assigned to see how you're doing. And the Notre Dame back in my day had more freshmen become sophomores than any school in the country. And I was always impressed with that. And I talked to Coach Parsegan about it when he was around. And then Lou Holtz said, we're going to take some chances. And most of them worked out, and they got a good education. I've always admired that about Notre Dame. Of course, coming out of the Chicago area, I was around a huge Catholic community. So Notre Dame was always number one in the hearts and minds of the Chicagoans. And I too became, I grew tired of listening about whether or not they were relevant or not all these other years. And I knew that Kelly was going to put the program back on the road, which he certainly did. And it's a great fan base. And people who do love college football, if they get a chance, obviously should go to South Bend and see a game, because just the whole environment and the atmosphere and that leprechaun bouncing around in the end zone. I knew a couple of those guys back in the day, and I was always amused by it. I always had a great time. They always took good care of it. Of course, Lindsey Nelson and Paul Horning, back in my writing days, it was always tape delay. People today are spoiled because you can see any game in every Notre Dame game. Back in the day, there was only one game up on a Saturday afternoon, and the Notre Dame game was shown on tape delay the following Sunday before the NFL got going. And it's interesting now because the public's so much more knowledgeable, gets to see all the games. And to me, Notre Dame is always relevant. I don't even think it's a discussion now, and it's good to see them in the mix. And they'll make a bowl game. Obviously, this group this year, they'll be headed off to a bowl. So we'll see what happens.
Brent, you obviously have a new Sunday NFL pregame show, Brent Musburger's Countdown to Kickoff. But I'd be remiss not to ask you to prognosticate a little bit, given where you are with the college season. When you look ahead, when you look at the halfway point of the college season now, it seems like there are 4 or 5 teams that have really separated themselves so far. But as you know, as we know, we all know nothing. What do you see playing out as far as maybe a future pick you really like for a champion, or a future for the Heisman?
Well, Bryce Young would have been my pick. However, I just checked to see what Coach Saban was saying about the Tennessee game this week, and it still sounds like he's pretty questionable. So he's missed a lot of time, and I am still a Heisman voter, and that probably will influence me a little bit. So I will look to Mr. Stroud, the quarterback at Ohio State. I think the Buckeyes have a chance. I don't know if they can beat Georgia and Alabama, but they might be able to get by, let's say, Alabama in a semifinal game if it comes to that. So those three teams have my eye as far as the national championship is concerned, and I think that fourth spot is a little bit up in the air. I keep an eye on what's going on at USC. Speaking of schools with the transfer portal, USC, if USC stays unbeaten, okay, and I'm sure Irish fans don't like hearing that, but if they were to stay unbeaten, I'm not so sure that the committee wouldn't include them in a Final Four. But we shall see. But right now, Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama, in that order, I think have separated a little bit from the pack. And we'll see how the rest of the season unfolds.
Well, Brent, we'll wrap up on this. You mentioned sort of sports fans being spoiled today, and I definitely felt that when I went up to Circus Sports on Friday night, sat in on Tim Murray's show, and saw both Stadium Swim and the sports book downstairs. It's quite a setup. I was interested, like, I mean, you've always sort of had an eye on, our friends in the desert, and that's so much more mainstream now. But like, what attracted you to make the move out there and just sort of throw yourself into viewing sports and consuming sports through a different lens?
Well, I'd always been interested, even as a writer. Late in the year, the Chicago American would assign me to the West Coast baseball races because the Dodgers with Koufax and Drysdale and that bunch were so good, and they always had a big series. But I always took an extra day and stopped off in Vegas. I was always fascinated by the city, and of course, a lot of the lads from Chicago, if you know what I mean, they had helped start the gambling community out here. So I already had some acquaintances in Las Vegas and came out, and then very early on, I met Jimmy the Greek. I didn't know anything about sports betting. I knew there was a lot of betting on baseball at the time. And so he introduced me to bookmakers around town, and and then when I went to the NFL today, it became apparent to me that one of the driving forces behind the growth of the NFL was actually betting on the games. Now, not all point spreads, but there were office pools galore in which people picked winners. They just liked the action on a Sunday. And so I said, this is bigger than the league wants to admit. And if you go back to the founding of the National Football League, there were gamblers galore who helped start it. Mr. Rooney, of course, got his stake in betting on horse racing. And you can go on around the league and find various people. So I became very interested in it. And then as to why I'm living out here now, my nephew would not take no for an answer. ESPN was very gracious. I had a longer-term contract with them, and they agreed to let me out of it to come out here. So, and it's closer. My grandchildren live up in Montana, and it's just a 2-hour flight. Thank you, Allegiant Airlines, for the nonstop to Missoula. But I could go up there and spend time with them, and I've got a 12-year-old right now who's playing his first tackle football. I get a big kick out of going and watching the practices during the week and seeing the youngsters involved in it. So it was always, and I think if you look around for sure, if you just check ESPN out, it's unbelievable how much gambling information is up there. I mean, they used to take me to the woodshed every time I would mention an over/under number. You can't do that. Blah 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 blah. Oh, really? Well, take a look at what's going on now. The world has changed. However, I must say, and I say, if there are any youngsters listening to me, listen carefully, because you're not going to beat it long term. I only know a handful of gamblers who've ever made a great success out of betting on sports. And another piece of advice, get away from those parlays and bet individual games and individual totals, okay? these casinos aren't any smaller here, simply because people don't come in there and win 6-team and 7-team parlays. You're going to see 1 or 2 every year because they like to get that publicity out there. But I'm here to tell you from experience, folks, don't do it.
Well, we love to sign off on that note, giving gambling advice to the youngsters listening to the Shamrock. But Brent Musburger, really appreciate you joining us. Hope you enjoy yourself out there and enjoy the rest of the season.
Thanks a lot, and go Irish. Take care, lads.
Thanks, Brent. Matt, I thought that was an awesome interview. One thing I wanted to slip in there, only to further blow Brent's mind about gambling in college football today, was there was a post-game video from Notre Dame BYU where Marcus Freeman turns to the chaplain, Nate Wills, and says, "What do they always say here?" And Father Nate says, "The house always wins," which is just like the fact that a priest is talking about a gambling turns of phrase was just like, wow, this 2022, we're living in some weird times. But what was your favorite part of the interview? I felt like there were a bunch of highlights.
A lot to get to. He slipped the Catherine Webb stuff in there.
Oh, what a pro.
I didn't want to bring it up, but I think the context in which he slipped it in there is even funnier. Like, I think the listeners will really like it because it's in the context of like, "You're welcome, Brian Kelly. The only reason you didn't get killed more for your performance that night because I got killed for my performance that night." So that was a classic Brent Musburger.
Yeah, that was really good. It's I enjoyed sort of his outlook on the portal and NIL and just sort of like the future of college football, because it's like if anyone would have a reason to sort of be romantic about what college football used to be, it would be him. And I took his sort of commentary as much more pragmatic about this is sort of where the sport is. Doesn't mean like everything needs to change at the rate it's changing, but it's not also it was all better back when I was calling these games as well, which I feel like a lot of people can kind of fall into that trap when they've sort of lived a more romantic version of college football than what we're covering today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And even him just kind of taking us down memory lane with his friends from Chicago and how he really kind of scratched the public surface of that gambling itch that, again, was a third rail topic till 3-4 years ago, till it got legalized everywhere in the United States. It was fun. I had great expectations for him because he's Brent Musburger, but I think he went deeper and in more depth with Notre Dame and college football and gambling at large than I thought he would have come into it, because I don't have any personal issues with him. I don't know if you do, but
no,
he doesn't need from Adam.
No, and I think I mentioned this in the interview. Like, he is one of the reasons that I wanted to get into sports media in the first place. I remember watching NFL Today and then watching NFL games and thinking how cool that job was, and then turning down the volume on my TV and calling another 30-point Detroit Lions loss or writing about it, because that's sort of what you did in Michigan if you were a kid in the 80s. So yeah, it was great because I feel like there was not just nostalgia in there, but some updated takes as well. And like, obviously sharp with Michael Mayer and, VSiN and what's going on in that space as well. So, and hey, look, he got into Stanford this weekend where Notre Dame is opened as a 17-point favorite. I'm partial to the opening lines at Circa because they're a friend of the show, if they can be. And so what I was just sort of after we were both at North Carolina, we were both in Vegas. I was at Cal. You were I was
at Cal. I wasn't at Carolina.
Oh, for some reason I thought you were at Marshall. Yeah, you did come to Cal. And we were both at Ohio State. So we've seen Notre Dame up close a lot. And I get the sense that Notre Dame has a little bit more of a repeatable identity now. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like my expectations for Saturday is like that Notre Dame should and will cover. But Notre Dame has a ways to go to sort of fully regain the benefit of the doubt that they had down cold under Brian Kelly in terms of beating teams that they're better than.
Look at you, Pete. 1 weekend in Vegas, you're already referencing your guys in the desert.
Yes.
I think I said this to you when we were exiting the press box Saturday night, and we saw Stanford was winning against Oregon State, and I went back to my room and watched that incredible finish. Miles Boykin.
What you said was we're going to Mandalay Bay.
Yeah. Speak for yourself. I went home. One night was one night too many for me there on Friday, but it had Miles Boykin Citrus Bowl vibes. Not as nice of a catch. It wasn't one-handed, but Oregon State
I felt the same way.
Stealing that one out of thin air. Stanford lately has been like a team that plays maybe one really good game a year, and I thought that was that game for them this past.
I think
Saturday.
It was that game for them,
and they lost it.
Right, that's a problem.
That is a problem if you're Stanford. Now, they played two of them last year. They'd upset Oregon at home, and they got Clay Helton fired in week 2 by absolutely destroying a very bad USC team on the road last year. But this is just not the Stanford of our older brothers, for lack of a better analogy. Like, this is, we've said in multiple group texts, what's more surprising, how good they were able to get in that early part of this decade or last decade, versus how quickly they fell to really the bottom of the barrel. I mean, they're 11th in total defense right now in the Pac-12, 10th in rushing defense. Have not looked all that inspiring this season outside of an inspired offensive effort against USC in week 2 this year. I think it's going to be a tough go for the Cardinal really from here on out. I mean, you look at that schedule, at Notre Dame this week, they still got to play BYU in their finale. They still got to go to UCLA and Utah. It's looking rough for David Shaw in that group right now. And I don't, is there a path to covering? Sure. I don't know if there's much of a path to victory for Stanford heading into Saturday night, short of Notre Dame completely overlooking them, which I don't think you do when UNLV is who you got on deck.
Now our next partner is a pretty cool product. Let's talk about Athletic Greens. If you're looking to get better gut health, more energy, or a stronger immune system in a really easy, natural way, you've got to check out Athletic Greens. I'm sure you all agree that most of us are not huge fans of having to take a bunch of pills or vitamins in the morning. But with Athletic Greens, you can get rid of all those extra vitamin bottles and finally make some room in your cabinet. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one solution that actually tastes good. You'll really enjoy getting your daily vitamins. So, what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. Athletic Greens has over 7,000 5-star reviews and is recommended by professional athletes. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/CFB22. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/CFB22 to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
I don't know. I feel like Notre Dame is sort of addicted to the way they're playing right now. Like now they kind of have a taste of like, all right, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it takes to keep having it look this way. And we'll continue like that in terms of their practice and their prep. I mean, Stanford, one of the worst rush defenses of the country in terms of yards per carry allowed, and dead last in the country in turnover margin. There's only one other team who has forced only 2 turnovers, and it's Notre Dame and Stanford. They're at the bottom. But Notre Dame protects the ball. Safety, Stanford does not.
The safety does not count as a turnover.
Safety does not count as a turnover, I don't think. Based on what I'm looking at right now.
The interception.
Yeah, they had the fumble recovery at North Carolina and the interception. Notre Dame has had 2 turnovers forced. Stanford has 2 picks. And there are a lot of ways to beat Notre Dame, or at least a few ways, but if you can't stop the run, I don't know how any of that really matters. Nor do I understand. Like, I realize there's some rivalry talk from Marcus Freeman on Monday, which I think is just something that coaches say sometimes.
Not the last one.
Yeah, this just isn't a rivalry anymore. It used to be great. Now it's just another game on the schedule if you're Notre Dame, and frankly, if you're Stanford. So I don't quite get the investment from Stanford emotionally or prep wise coming to this game, especially the way that they lost last week was pretty brutal. It's hard to just sort of overcome that, and then you fly 4.5 hours to the Midwest to play on Saturday night when the low is 41 degrees. I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's a lot set up other than the fact that they have a really good quarterback and a good receiver core. That's kind of it. They're not good on either line. They don't stop the run. It's hard to beat Notre Dame that way.
Yeah, I thought the reaction shots to the crowd after they blew it Saturday were pretty telling. Like,
bad. They found some people, which I was impressed.
I agree. I was also pleasantly surprised to see that. But the faces on the students there, it wasn't like, I'm trying to picture if that happened in like a Big Ten or SEC venue, and the anger and shock and frustration. They all had these like knowing smiles on their face. They were like, oh yeah, there's the team who schooled together.
There was no. Did they find anyone doing like the surrender cobra? Nothing. I mean, there's no move like that.
No, it was like all right, that's what we thought we were getting. It just showed up in the 59th minute. But yeah, I mean, it's been a rough go over for them, and it's a shame because Brian Kelly always seemed to like not really pump up rivalries, at least when it came to Michigan, whereas Marcus Freeman's taking the opposite approach, at least with a game that's could be a look ahead spot. But I always thought USC's obviously the main rival, and Michigan there's a history there. I thought like in that like 2011 to maybe 2015, 16 era, like that was a hell of a rivalry. Like you had two very similar teams. I mean, we would hear from the players after like, no, we hate those. Like we're playing ourselves. Like we hate these guys. You know what I mean? Like obviously USC's a more traditional rival, but you have Jack Swarbrick, who's got degrees from both schools, and every year until recently they put out that stat, we're the only two schools ranked in both the top 25 of the AP poll and top 25 of the U.S. News and World Report. Not the case right now for either, although our friend Brent Musburger thinks Notre Dame should be ranked, and I'm starting to agree with him the more and more I look into things. But yeah, there's definitely been a vibe turn around Notre Dame. I mean, Drew Pine is changing the conversation, as you wrote this week. He's playing with a lot more confidence. I mean, it reached the point where like Marcus Freeman was seriously asked this week, like, do you regret not starting this guy earlier? And to his credit, he held his ground and said, no, this was based on what we saw in practice, and what we saw in practice helps determine Tyler Buchner to be the starter. But the fact that we're even asking that question 2 games and 3 weeks after he looked lost at Cal and after this offense looked lost at Cal is pretty telling. And I think it changes the kind of calculus for this team moving forward, especially, again, we talk about how North Carolina really allowed this offense to kind of take out his frustrations while developing his identity by running the ball against them. And they were able to kind of build off that a little bit at BYU. I mean, I look at Stanford right now, maybe not as poor as I do North Carolina from a defensive standpoint, but they're pretty darn close. And especially in those conditions, I just think Notre Dame's probably going to have a field day as far as just running it up the middle and playing, dominating the time of possession and really dictating the tempo and pace and identity of this game in a way that 5 years ago, that this was a toss-up.
Yeah, it does make me a little bit wistful for the days of Owen Marisic and his double touchdowns and the goal line stand and Jim Harbaugh throwing shade on behalf of Brian Polian in the post-game press conference when he was Stanford's special teams coach. So, yeah,
let's not forget bye-bye. Remember that one?
Oh God, yeah, that's sort of overlooked. The very hot moment between a Stanford assistant strength coach and Brian Kelly, which I caught down on the field. So that maybe this was really a good series. I mean, it was Jimmy Clausen's first win in 2007. There was some animosity between, I think, some angst there between Weiss and Harbaugh, and then you had Harbaugh and Kelly, and like Notre Dame admitting that Stanford was a model that they needed to follow and build early, which, I mean, you just don't hear Notre Dame say stuff like that, or many programs say stuff like that they're trying to follow a rival and take a page from their blueprint. But this has gone back to the days of Buddy Tevens, unfortunately, for Stanford, but fortunately for Notre Dame. So maybe this will be the rivalry break that Marcus Freeman needs, because he's getting a USC that Brian Kelly didn't get, but he's also getting a Stanford that Brian Kelly didn't get. And one of those is breaking Marcus Freeman's way. So it'll be an interesting game, but I think mostly because it's going to be kind of a confirming bit of evidence about where the season is going for Notre Dame and how they will get to 6-2. And I know people talk about Syracuse being undefeated with their great wins over Virginia and Purdue, but I think that Notre Dame will sort of flex a little bit on Saturday night and kind of hammer Stanford and comfortably cover.
Syracuse is an interesting one because I got asked yesterday about like their chances of keeping this going. I look at their schedule and I'm like, yeah, they could easily lose their next 6 games and then beat BC to go 6-6 and be bowl eligible. I'll be curious to see how Syracuse handles NC State, albeit at home this weekend. I mean,
isn't Devin Leary out? NC State starting quarterback?
Is he out? I know he got hurt last week. I'm not sure what the prognosis is for this week. I will say, the Dome's always tricky, no matter how good or bad Syracuse is, and you can't overlook that part. But yeah, I'm a little wistful myself because Stanford Notre Dame was always kind of a fun one to look forward to every year. And David Shaw always had a way of like just getting a little too snippy post game in defeat, whether it was about a phantom whistle in 2014 or the
Notre Dame's band. He's a big critic of Notre Dame's band playing too loudly at inappropriate times in his mind.
David Shaw, the last guy to coach against Brian Kelly as the Notre Dame head coach.
True, that is true.
He did not see that coming. I saw him that weekend in Las Vegas, of course, at the College Hall of Fame dinner, and I was like, "Did you see that coming?" He's like, "No." "Okay, good. I didn't either." But how do you see this one playing out, Pete? Do you have a prediction ready?
I mean, I think I don't have. I can just spitball a prediction because it's their predictions, and I put too much time into them anyway. So, I mean, Notre Dame 42-17. I think Notre Dame will play well. I don't think Stanford is going to offer much resistance defensively, and I think that Notre Dame's defense is still good for probably 1 or 2 plays where you're just like, what are you doing? And Davis Mills is a legit quarterback, so I think for Notre Dame to just completely shut down Stanford offensively, I think is asking a little bit much. The way Notre Dame's secondary is put together, particularly if Tariq Bracy is either not going to play or not going to play at 100%. One of those things is probably going to be true. He's not going to be at a full go. So I think that's good for Stanford. Maybe not making it competitive, but at least scoring. But I just think that if you can't stop the run game, I don't know how you can hang with Notre Dame. You?
I agree. In some ways, this reminds me of 2018. I think that was Ian Book's first home start, and Stanford hadn't fallen off yet. They'd actually just beaten Notre Dame a year earlier. And that was a big primetime game. And it was like, look at the way they played. If Book is this good and if he can run this offense and they can actually run the ball, like they might be able to name their score tonight. It didn't get that ugly, but they clearly established their dominance early on and were able to control the game. I'll go 38-21, which unintentionally I think is a push. I think the back door is your friend if you're Stanford. I think McKee is a good quarterback. And Bracy's out. I think they'll get some points, but they're not going to stop Notre Dame.
That's what the backdoor cover with Tanner McKee maybe throwing a touchdown late is on point there. I think that's possible. He seems to be, for some of Stanford's issues, they still have good pro style quarterbacks, even if the lines have fallen off and the tight ends have fallen off. And there's not, Notre Dame's not losing coveted DBs to Stanford anymore in recruiting either. They're just like, it just doesn't happen. So it feels like a game where Notre Dame should be comfortably ahead going into the fourth quarter and is able to sort of enjoy a primetime game. And then I think we both agree Notre Dame will be ranked next week. Then Brent Musburger will be proved prophetic.
Well, I'll end this with a prop since you're a degenerate after 2 nights or 3 nights of Vegas, whatever it was. Over under on snaps Steve Angeli sees in this game.
Ooh. So I'll set the line and then you have to bet it. Because let's see. I will set it at 8.5.
Oh, geez. I'll go under. I was going to say 3. He'll come in for 3 kneel downs at the end, but I think we will see him. We should see him.
Okay.
Based on what we think about both these teams. 8.5.
Yeah.
Wow. You're really.
So this was an easy under bet for you then? Then I guess I have to take the over. Maybe I could even tease it down to 6.5 based on your reaction and get action. So yeah, but I think we'll see Steve Angeli's college debut on Saturday night. It feels like there's a possibility of that. So, and then we'll be post game pod, but I will be up because it's a home game. We won't be able to sneak into the Notre Dame coaching booth anymore to record. But I'll be up in the Notre Dame radio booth on my own. You'll be home in Chicago, and we will Zoom it. So that will be a pretty late night late night recording, and unfortunately not like last week. After I go home, I won't be going to the Bellagio. I'll be going straight to bed, I think. So not nearly as exciting.
Did you? What was the bet again? Everyone told you to do.
It was a green 00 in roulette.
Oh, that's right.
It did not pay out no matter how many times I bet it. It was almost like the odds were against me. I think I saw former Notre Dame walk-on Cam Ekenyake at the table next to me at the Bellagio.
You and only you recognize.
Yeah, did not. It was only me. I did not chat with them. I think one of our listeners / readers did stop me while I was walking through the Bellagio and be like, "Hey, like your stuff? Can we get a photo?" Sure. So yeah,
wow.
There's a lot of good Notre Dame energy around around Vegas last weekend. It was a good time. Shamrock Series needs to return there sooner. Maybe not sooner, but
the Shamrock needs to return to the Shamrock Series.
Yes, I agree. Maybe we should just go do a live show in Vegas or something and see what kind of turnout we can get. We can do it at VSiN Studios.
Yeah, we'll do it with Brent.
Yeah, friend of the show. Okay. On that note, we'll wrap up our midweek episode of the Shamrock. Matt and I will be back very late Saturday night, so you'll be listening to it on Sunday to recap Notre Dame Stanford. So until then, he's Matt, I'm Pete. Thanks for being with us on the latest episode of the Shamrock.